Let me start with something I see over and over again. Every single LSAT score release, I open my inbox, my DMs, Reddit threads, YouTube comments, and it's always the same message, just written 100 different ways. Steve, I don't get it. I didn't panic. I didn't blank out. I didn't feel terrible walking out of the test. And yet, my LSAT score came back 10, 15, even 20 points lower than my practice test average. And so, if that's you today, I want to say this clearly right up front. You're not alone, you're not crazy, and this is not just you suddenly forgetting how to take the LSAT. Today, I want to talk through what's actually going on behind these shocking LSAT score drops, why it feels so disorienting, and what you should realistically do next. And yes, we're going to address the question everyone's asking: did LSAC mess up scores? But before we talk about LSAC, curves, or scaling, we've got to start with something basic: how information spreads online. There's this concept called selection bias, and the idea is simple. When somebody takes the LSAT and scores exactly what they expected, they don't post about it. Nobody writes a viral Reddit post titled, "I scored my practice test average and I feel totally great about it." That post gets zero traction. Even the people who slightly outperform their expectations usually don't write essays about it. But when someone's score drops 20 points below their practice tests, it's shocking and upsetting and it feels unfair, so people rush online to talk about it. So online forums become flooded with extreme outliers. You've got people who got massive score drops, weird test day experiences, conspiracy theories about LSAC, and speculation about secret curves and hidden agendas. But what you're not seeing are the thousands of students whose scores landed right where their practice test predicted. Now, that doesn't mean the drops aren't real. It means the internet amplifies the most extreme cases. So there's the question: did LSAC secretly make the LSAT harder? And you've probably heard this rumor that they made it harder to compensate for recent changes to the test. They're looking to punish people now, and the curve is brutal on purpose. But is it likely that LSAC sat in a room and said, "let's wreck everybody this time"? No. Is it possible that structural changes to the LSAT have made outcomes feel harsher for students? Yeah, I would say so. And here's why. The LSAT used to have the logic game section, and many students could eventually perfect it through repetition and pattern recognition. For some people, logic games boosted their scores. For others, it was a total nightmare. And so when the test shifted and that section was replaced with more logical reasoning, the impact wasn't neutral. It helped some folks, hurt others. Logical reasoning rewards your ability to read precisely, to engage in abstract thinking, to recognize traps, to engage in consistency under pressure, and some students will thrive here, and others don't. So right away, you've got winners and losers, even if the overall difficulty of the LSAT hasn't changed. But the real elephant in the room is LSAT score inflation, and that's the part that most people underestimate. Over the past several years, LSAT scores have inflated significantly, in part because the LSAT's shorter. That leads to less fatigue, endurance is less of a factor, and you have a more flexible format. And so, most importantly, a dramatic rise in approved accommodations for extra time and extra breaks. And all of that pushes scores up. And this is not just a guess. You can see this clearly in the law school data. Top law schools now routinely report median LSAT scores that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. A score that used to place you safely at the very top of the applicant pool now puts you in a much tighter competition band, which tells us something important. Because of the LSAT score inflation, LSAC has no choice but to respond. They just don't have a choice about it. And so they're not changing questions retroactively, they are adjusting the scoring scale. And that's where things start to feel brutal. LSAC converts raw scores to scaled scores out of 180. And when the scale tightens, that means there are fewer wrong answers separating big score jumps. And small mistakes matter more, so consistency becomes everything. So now imagine this scenario. You walk out of the LSAT thinking, it felt fine, a few questions were weird, but overall it was okay. And that might be true. But if two questions went sideways in one section, three in another, one more in a third, that is suddenly enough to drop your score far more than it would have in the past. Not because you forgot the material or you collapsed under pressure, but because the margin for error is thinner. And that's the part that nobody warns you about. You might have studied for months, even a year or more, based on historical expectations. You trained using previously administered LSAT practice tests, you tracked your PT averages, and you trusted that range. So when your score comes back far below that range, it doesn't just feel disappointing, it feels destabilizing, like the rules changed mid-game. And I get why that feels unfair, but the uncomfortable truth is that whether it should be fair doesn't change what you have to do next. Complaining won't raise your score. Spiraling's not going to fix anything. You've got to adjust. Now, a lower than expected score doesn't mean you're suddenly bad at the LSAT or your intelligence regressed or your law school goals are dead. It just means the LSAT is less forgiving. And that changes how you prepare. When the scale tightens, the game changes. You can't win by just getting better at medium difficulty questions because everybody gets those. The differentiator now is how well can you handle the hardest questions on the test, especially in logical reasoning, because it now makes up 2/3 of your score. That means any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are compounded or doubled across the two sections. Any weaknesses are amplified, and your sloppy reasoning here is punished. So if you're crushing the middle, but you're leaking points at the top end, the scale is going to expose that. So if you're taking it in April, June, or beyond, you don't need more practice tests or more random drills or more content overload. You need brutal honesty about your weakest question types. You need exposure to the hardest variants of those questions and deep review. That means you're slowing down. You're dissecting wrong answers until you can explain exactly why each wrong answer choice is tempting and why it's ultimately wrong. You've got to be able to recognize trap patterns instantly and tighten your reasoning precision. It's not doing more, it's doing better. And LSAC does offer score audits if you feel like your score is just wrong and LSAC made a mistake, but those exist mostly as a holdover from the paper test era back when mistakes were more common. Now that the LSAT's fully online, a true scoring error is rare and unlikely. Of course, if your score is so wildly outside your practice test range, if it's so extreme it feels impossible, a score audit might give you peace of mind, but there are a couple of important things you've got to know. Your audited score is final, even if it's lower than your first score, and almost all audits will confirm that original first score. So it's just a sanity check, nothing more than that. So here's what I want you to internalize. Your LSAT score is not a measure of your worth. It's not a verdict on your future or how successful you'll be as an attorney. It's just a snapshot of your reasoning under pressure on one specific day. And that snapshot exists within a changing system. And the system is changing, of course. The curves are tightening, the standards are rising, and you've got to adapt. And if your practice test average was higher than your official score, that data still matters because it means your potential is there. But the path forward requires something different. You've got to engage in deeper analysis. You've got to do harder questions. You've got to execute better. The LSAT is not impossible, but it has become less forgiving. And once you can accept that, you're going to stop feeling blindsided and you'll start preparing like someone who understands the real game. That is how you regain control. And if you'd like my help preparing for the LSAT whenever you're taking it, whether you're a first-time test taker or you are a retaker, if your score coming out in a couple minutes is not what you were hoping for, I'm here to help. There are many LSAT retake opportunities available. You can take it in February in just a week and change, of course, but with more time, more improvement. You could take it in April, 10 weeks from now, June, 4.5 months from now, or you got August, 6+ months away, plenty of time to improve significantly. If you'd like my help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever else you might be watching this. Open offer. Happy to meet with you personally, privately, one-on-one on Zoom video, talk through your situation, help you craft a plan of attack for your LSAT prep going forward. I see a lot of questions coming into the chat here. I'll get to as many as I can. Please keep them coming. I'm happy to support you during what might be a difficult time, depending on how scores turn out. I'm opening to any questions at all, anything LSAT and law school admissions. I see that MGian's asking, isn't the LSAT score inflation just studying being optimized? I mean, studying is always being optimized, always being improved, right? Because LSAT prep, test prep in general is an arms race. I mean, law school admissions is ultimately a zero-sum contest because there are a limited number of law school seats, right? Law schools can't expand their class sizes indefinitely because they have institutional pressures and bureaucratic requirements, physical constraints, of course, administrative constraints limiting how many students they can educate. At least in person, of course. Online, that could be a different story, but it is what it is. And so basically that means that people study better, they study more, LSAT scores rise, LSAC then counteracts that by increasing the difficulty level of the test. But I think as much as people might be prepping better and prepping more, there's also the consideration of the extra time accommodations. The LSAT is a strictly timed exam. You've got 4 sections of 35 minutes each. Each section has approximately 26 questions to complete. That's only a little less than a minute and a half per question. It is an unreasonable constraint. There's not really enough time to adequately solve the questions. And so when you introduce time and a half, double time, triple time, when you give somebody 70 minutes per section rather than 35 minutes per section, they're going to be able to get a lot more questions right. And that leads them to get higher scores. If you look at the LSAT score inflation reflected in the ABA 509 reports, which show you the LSAT score medians for every single ABA approved law school, what you're going to see is that the medians are out of control. They're kind of ridiculous. They're unthinkable compared to 10, 20 years ago. The top 14 law schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Cornell, NYU, and so on, they've all got LSAT score medians of 170 to 174. Which means that you want to ideally have a 175 or above in order to maximize your odds of admission. And keep in mind, those are trailing numbers, they're last year's numbers. And law schools are always looking to raise their medians because they want to be more competitive in the US News rankings. And so keep in mind that if your GPA is below a 3.9, which are the GPA medians for those law schools, you want to have above a 175 to counteract that to maximize your odds of admission. And of course, I'm not saying that you got to go for a T14 law school. Not everybody needs to, but if you want to go to a lower ranked school, you might want to have more scholarship money, which comes from having higher scores you're applying with just to maximize what they're going to give you. So set your goals, set your targets accordingly. I see Seabass24 is asking, are the scores just on our account? So yes, we are about to hit 9 a.m. Eastern time, which means scores are going to come out in just a minute or two. You'll receive an email from LSAC in the next few minutes, most likely. But if you were to log into your lsac.org account, your score might already be there waiting for you. The scores enter your LSAC account first, and then they email you after that. And so you can wait for the email to come in. But if you're eager for your score, which I'm imagining that you are because you're on an LSAT prep live at 9 a.m. Eastern time, you probably want to see your score. So might not be a bad idea to log into your lsac.org account right now, and your score might be there waiting for you. And if you do see your score there, just do me a favor, drop in the chat that your scores are out so others are aware of that and can check their own scores as well. I see Kale's asking, do law schools consider both your original score and your retake score? So they will be able to see all of your LSAT scores on your record, but it's only the highest LSAT score that is considered for law school admissions. In other words, law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score into consideration because that is the only score they are required to report to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News gets their data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. And that change has been in effect for approximately 20 years, which is actually my entire LSAT career. I've been teaching the LSAT for over 20 years now, since 2005. And so in 2004, 2005, law schools would average multiple scores because they were required to for ABA reporting. That changed in 2006. Now it's only the highest score on record that counts. And so let's say you took the LSAT in January, got your score back today, you got a 160. Let's say that you then retake it in April and you get a 170. The 170 is what counts. They're not averaging them and saying 160 and 170 is averaged to 165. The 170 is what gets reported. That's what ultimately matters. And by the way, I see that Scap Singer is telling us that scores are received. And so, folks, if you haven't already, check your LSAC account. Your score is probably waiting for you in there, and you'll probably get an email soon if you haven't already. Do us a favor and drop in the chat how your score turned out. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you retaking? If so, when are you retaking? What was your score? If you want to share, happy to give you some feedback and help you figure out your next steps. And so, point being, if your score is not what you were hoping for, retaking is a good idea. Because if you do better, great, the higher score is what counts. If you do worse, no big deal, because only the highest score on record is what ultimately matters. And so you've got only a week and a half till the February LSAT, not really enough time to make a massive change in your LSAT prep. And hopefully, if you are taking February, also you've already been studying diligently, taking those practice tests, reviewing them in depth. I don't give a ton of radical change advice regarding changing up your prep in the final week or so, because this is the time to be refining things and kind of tapering down rather than making some radical new experiment in your pacing approach, for example, or your approach to a certain question type. So I recommend instead we think more about, okay, well, if you're taking in April or June, what could you do differently? Because April gives you 10 weeks, plenty of time. June gives you 4.5 months, even more time. And of course, February is the last LSAT I would recommend taking for the current admissions cycle. But if you wanted to take it in April or June, you could apply the second that applications open in the fall. So February is more last minute for this cycle on the tail end. It's not too late, of course. You can take it in February. Scores come back February 25th, and you could still apply to start law school in fall of 2026, roughly 7 months from now. If you took it in January, got your score back today, of course, it's not too late either. You can still apply now. I see Scap Singers saying that they got their score back. First LSAT 155. Okay, not a bad start. I do recommend retaking, though, for the best outcomes. And so think about what a retake prep could look like. Is there a resource or a support or a method of studying that you have not yet taken advantage of that you could take advantage of going forward? Or maybe you just need more time, and that's okay too. If you want to talk through what a retake prep could look like, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring, private one-on-one sessions for everybody watching this now or later to support you for your prep, whether you're retaking or you're a first timer. Plenty of time to improve between now and April or now and June. If you want to book that free tutoring with me, you can book that call. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everyone now and later. I see NG45 is asking, is it a common issue to run out of practice tests? So there are some folks who do run out of practice tests, but there are plenty available. You've got roughly 60 practice tests published by LSAC in their Law Hub platform. You have exams numbered 101 to 159 in the new LSAT format. They renumbered them after the removal of logic games back in June 2024. They replaced them with the second score logical reasoning section, and at that time, they reorganized, they reshuffled, they remixed all of the practice tests into the new prep format: 2 scored logical reasoning sections, 1 scored reading comp section, and 1 unscored extra section of either logical reasoning or reading comprehension. And so I recommend using Law Hub Advantage to do all your practice tests. Don't use the outdated prep books on Amazon, because most of them are the old format. And of course, the LSAT has changed. Not only did they remove the logic games section, but they put the LSAT online. And so I always recommend studying like it's going to be on game day with the modern format no logic games, and also using the modern LSAT test day software. If you're taking your practice tests in books and then you're taking it online, you're not necessarily going to be familiar with or acclimated to the new LSAT format. And students typically drop from at least 5 to 8 points from their practice tests to the actual exam, in part due to a lack of familiarity, a lack of proper simulation for the modern LSAT format, not being familiar with the software, for example. And so part of how you mitigate that is by taking practice tests on LawHub, properly simulating test day conditions. You have 2 scored sections back to back with no break, then a 10-minute break between sections 2 and 3, and then 2 more sections back to back, and that's the test. So when you're taking your practice tests, take them on LawHub and be strict with yourself. Don't go get a snack from the fridge. Don't check your phone. Don't talk to your friend or your roommate or your significant other or your family. Don't go out for a walk in the middle. And you can't take 4 separate sections on 4 consecutive days, add them together, and call that a practice test, because it's not testing the endurance factor as well. And so I typically divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Pacing is doing individual sections to work on your time management, how you're allocating your time over the course of the section, and then endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests. And so you want to make sure that you're hitting each one of those phases. If you're taking the LSAT in April, 10 weeks from now, you've got plenty of time to work through each phase. You could devote 3 weeks to accuracy and drilling, 3 weeks to pacing, and then 4 weeks to full-length practice tests. If you're taking it in June, you could devote 1 month to accuracy, 1 month to pacing, and 2 months to full exams. And I like to give a little bit more time to full exams because endurance is real. And you want to do at least 10 to 12 full-length timed practice tests before the big day, so test day feels like just another run-through and you've done it all before. And so to Val's question here, why did my score drop? Could be a lack of properly simulating test day conditions, could be nerves and anxiety, could be a bad proctor, could be a tech issue. I mean, Val, when you think about it, why do you think your score might have dropped? Were you simulating test day conditions in the lead up to the exam? Did you do at least 10 to 12 full-length timed practice tests? Were you using LawHub's platform to simulate those practice tests? Or were you taking them out of books? Were you doing a sufficient number of full exams using the official LSAC software? And did you have any issues with your tech, internet connection? Did you have any issues with the proctor? All of that can play a role. And so one of the things that we do in our coaching programs is we help you properly simulate test day conditions. We help you take enough practice tests, and we also help you build a strong foundation in the lead up. And if you're feeling like nothing went wrong during the test and you felt good about it, which is unfortunate, I'm sorry to hear it, we might just need to raise your baseline. If your goal was a 170 and you hit a 163, that's unfortunately all too normal. We might need to get your practice test up to a 175 average going in so that you've got a buffer, so that even if your score drops, you're still safely and securely going to be in that 170 plus range. So I'm sorry to hear what happened. Val, it's unfortunate. We can dig into it deeper more. If you want to book the free LSAT tutoring with me, we could talk through the particulars of what might have happened. Of course, the links in my bio, links in the chat, links in the description. Happy to talk through this more and try to help troubleshoot what might have gone on. I see Duncan's asking, does LSAC only give you the score and your percentile, or do you get any meaningful retake stats? So unfortunately, just the score, just the percentile, no meaningful stats that you could use for a retake, unfortunately. I wish they at least gave you your raw score at minimum, and ideally your breakdown per section. I don't see why they couldn't do that, but they don't. And so in terms of meaningful retake data, you're going to want to look at the practice test that you were taking in the lead up to your official, and then maybe do some more practice tests now, because it's been a few weeks since the test, of course, and then we can look at that data, help you target your weak areas. Is there a certain question type, a certain method of reasoning, a certain section that gives you more trouble than another? And then that will help us better craft a retake plan for you if you're going to take it again in April or June. And feel free to book the tutoring with me for free and we could talk through it more. I see Jared got a 168 and looks pretty happy about it. Awesome. Congrats. Glad you rocked it. Glad you hit your goal. If you want to retake and aim for an even higher score, of course, I can help, but that's not too bad either. See Jared saying I can run to England now. Okay. All right. Yeah. I don't think law schools in England take the LSAT, as I think it's just used in North America, but whatever your plans are, that's cool. I see Nasser's asking, what type of LSAT coaching packages do we offer? And so we customize every program for the individual student, given your time frame, given your goals, given your current score. And then we make a plan to get you to your goal from where you're at right now, given the time that you have. And so, of course, for a student taking it in April, only 10 weeks away, it's going to be a more intensive boot camp style approach where you're getting live coaching 7 days a week, ideally, to get you the highest possible increase in a relatively shorter period of time. If you're aiming to take it in June, of course, 4.5 months away, we've got a bit more time. So it'll be more of a slow and steady approach. Of course, for August, we have even more time to get you that much higher score. And so we give you private one-on-one coaching, small group sessions via Zoom, on-demand video courses, custom study plan, but the particular is very based on those individual personal factors. And so I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one. You could book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, and we could talk through it more. Happy to help. Is scanning through for other questions here. Thanks for all the questions coming into the chat here. Ari's asking, I'm below the 25th percentile for my target school with regard to GPA and just under the median for my LSAT score for my top choice school. And so you're asking, are you not going to get in? Is it guaranteed that you're not going to get in? No, of course, I'm not going to say that you don't have a chance. Everyone still has a chance, even if they're below the numbers, but it becomes relatively unlikely when you're below both the LSAT median and the GPA median. Ideally, you want to be above at least one of those numbers to have a reasonable chance of getting in. And ideally, you want to be above both of those numbers to have a better chance of getting in. And so, of course, if you have an incredible background, your work experience is amazing, you've got killer essays, could you get in? Maybe, but it's relatively unlikely when you're below the numbers for both LSAT and GPA. If you're a splitter applicant, which it sounds like you are, you're below the 25th for the GPA, you want to be above the 75th for the LSAT to balance things out. So you'd ideally be a splitter applicant at this point, since your GPA is pretty fixed. Of course, you're not going to redo all of undergrad, of course, but you can retake the LSAT to maximize your odds of admission. That's what I would recommend for you at this stage, just to have a better chance of getting into your top choice school. Not going to say it's impossible that you'll get in, but law school admissions is primarily numbers driven, unlike undergrad admissions, where work experience and more like application essays and softs matter more. So my recommendation would be to retake the LSAT just to maximize your odds of getting in. And to Duncan's point here, saying I heard there's no stigma about taking the LSAT multiple times anymore. Is there any truth to that? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, of course, if you take it all 7 times in a very short period of time, starts to look a little bit questionable. Like, is this person really giving each LSAT administration their full effort, properly preparing for that administration? But if you're taking it 3, 4, 5 times even, and you're actually studying for each one of those takes, then it's totally fine. I don't see any issue, and law schools won't see any issue with that ultimately, because they have no incentive to care how many times you take the LSAT, because that's not what goes to the ABA, the American Bar Association. However, they do have incentive to care about the highest score that you have, because that's what goes to the American Bar Association for the 509 reports. That's what goes into the US News rankings calculations. And so the highest score matters. The number of takes doesn't really matter in the same way. They don't really care. I see Vain Steph is asking, this is my 3rd time taking the LSAT, and I keep getting 144, even with LSAT prep or without. Should I even bother retaking, or is law school not for me? So law school could still be for you. I'm not saying it's not. I don't think that you should write yourself off on this. Don't lose hope. Of course, we do want to help you get a higher than a 144, but law school could still be for you. I think the question here is, how exactly are you preparing for the LSAT? Are you preparing properly? Have you been self-studying with outdated textbooks? Are you using any prep courses? Have you gotten any coaching? How much time have you been putting in per day and per week? Is there a resource, a type of support that you have not yet taken advantage of, that you could take advantage of, that would help you get a higher score? But I've seen people take it 3 times, get low scores, retake it on their 4th or 5th take, and do much better. Just like there are people who might fail the bar 4 or 5 times, on their 6th time they pass. And that you only need to get a high LSAT score once, you only need to pass the bar once, and you're good, right? So I don't want you to get discouraged. I don't want you to lose hope. It's understandable that you would at this point, of course, but there might still be more untapped potential that has not yet been unleashed, that you have not yet unlocked. And so I definitely encourage you to book the free LSAT tutoring with me. We could dig into this a bit more, talk through your situation, figure out what low-hanging fruit, what potential there might be for you to help you get your score up. So definitely book the free call with me. Links below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help. I see that Magaliki is asking, this was my 3rd time also taking the test. I scored 2 points lower than the 2nd time. I'll stop right there. No big deal that you dropped. So only a higher score matters. I already canceled my 1st score. Should I cancel again? The truth is that it doesn't really matter whether you cancel your LSAT score or not, because only the highest score on record is what matters. And so a cancellation, of course, just negates the score entirely. If it's a low score, and it's not what you were hoping for, if it's below your high, they're going to see it, but they won't care, because only the highest score on record is what gets reported to the ABA. Cancellations are just an artifact of the time back when law schools did average multiple scores. And if you feel like it went bad, you would not want them to see it or consider it. But at this point, it doesn't matter. Do whatever feels better for you. I think you can keep it. It's fine. Heidi's asking, what do you recommend for studying? I'm scared the resources that I use are outdated. Yeah, you want to be really careful about that. A lot of these LSAT prep books on Amazon that are written by AI in some cases are certainly going to be outdated and questionable. A lot of the books out there that reference logic games, for example, are going to be outdated, because logic games have been off the test for over 1.5 years at this point. And there are more recent changes as well, like, for example, the changes to reading comprehension that we saw on the January LSAT, where some folks did not get a comparative or dual passage without warning. Big unannounced change there. Your prep books are not going to talk about that sort of thing, of course. There's also the upcoming scoring of the writing sample, either this year or next year, most likely. Not an official announcement yet, but we are seeing indications that it's coming, with LSAC posting about it on the website, of course, and then additionally the inclusion of the writing ability score on the score report. It's an empty field for now, but it will get filled in at some point soon. Your books aren't going to talk about that. So make sure that you're using only online materials, online courses, private coaching, up to date, live for the current format. The video courses only, or the prep books, may be outdated. So be careful about that. And we have our own courses, of course. Happy to talk you through details if you'd like. You could book a free call with me to discuss it. Free tutoring lessons open to everyone. Below the video, happy to help and talk through your situation. I see Destiny's asking, how can I improve my score? I did the same as my last take. Well, the question is, how did you study before? Did you self-study with only a textbook or only YouTube videos? Did you take a course? Did you get coaching? Is there some resource that you are aware of that you think could help, that you did not take advantage of, but you could take advantage of, that would help you improve your score? If not, this might be the time to take advantage of it. Are there any weak areas that you're aware of that you did not fully course correct on? Are you seeing in your analytics, in your data, in your review, that there is some type of question or type of reasoning that you weren't totally clear on, that you were maybe a bit hazy on, that you didn't fully learn? If so, this is the time to learn that, right? So this is the time to dig deeper on that. Give yourself another couple months to shore up those weak areas, fill in those gaps, and then you're going to see a score increase as a result. And if you need help identifying those weak areas, if you're not sure what you're getting wrong or why, of course, take another diagnostic because it's been a couple weeks at least, and then you could talk through it with me. I'm happy to dive into that with you. And to Brenda's question, similar, I got a 133. How can I improve? So if the LSAT's out of 180, 133 is below average, there's still a lot of work to be done in building a strong foundation. So I would start with logical reasoning because it's 2/3 of the test. So any gains that you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are going to be doubled across those two sections. And there's plenty of room to improve. There are, 47 points between a 133 and a 180. So at this point, any studying that you do will probably help, but you want to use high quality resources and give this a significantly more time. And I see G got a 128. Same answer. And no, don't give up. Don't give up. I mean, I'm wondering, how much prep did you do in the lead up to this test? Do you feel like you've truly given it your all? Did you study 20 hours a week for 5 or 6 months? If not, there's still a lot more that you could do, and you're competing against folks who are putting in that time. So you may just need to give it more time and give it more high quality focus, using better resources, getting more support. Your score just is a snapshot of where you are at this point in time. It is not a reflection of your true potential. It's not showing you whether you're capable of succeeding in law school or passing the bar or not. All it tells you is that you haven't yet done everything that you can do. There's still more that you could do. And of course, if you want to talk through particularly what you might have missed out on, what you haven't done that others are taking advantage of course, I'm happy to help and talk through it more personally as well and go deeper with you than we can in this context right now. But I'm sure there's a lot more we can do to get your score up. We just need to give you the right guidance, the right study plan, the right structure, the right support. I see Rick just booked the call with me. Awesome. Excited to meet with you, Rick. I see TC's asking, so should we not be practicing dual passages in reading comp right now? No, I would still definitely study dual passages, but just be aware that they may not appear on your official LSAT, even though they are included in the practice tests on Law Hub. LSAC has confirmed that going forward, some folks will get the dual passages and some folks won't, and you're not going to know in advance. But ultimately, while it might take some folks by a surprise, it's not really a change that should affect the way in which you study, because reading comp is still reading comp. And there are still going to be 3 single passages, maybe 4 single passages, but the skills that are tested are fundamentally not that different. You're always still looking for what is the main idea, the primary purpose, the organization of the passage, best title, tone, author's opinion. The only things that dual passages do differently are they compare the 2 shorter passages and you're looking for points of overlap or a lack of overlap. But the skills of the LSAT that they're testing don't really fundamentally change much, if at all. And so if you're doing real official practice tests, you're going to be in good shape. I see Rick is asking, I scored a 149. The last time I took the LSAT. Is getting a 170 plus maximum, or at least a 15-point increase, realistic by June? Oh yeah, I mean, to improve roughly 20 points or more by June in 4.5 months is definitely doable. The question is, how are you going to get those 20 points? How are you going to study? How much time will you put in per day and per week? What kinds of resources will you use? How many practice tests will you take? When are you going to take them? How are you going to review those practice tests? How are you going to target your weak areas? All of that makes a difference. It's not just how much you study, but the way in which you study. And ultimately, of course, the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition. If you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing the exam test maker's perspective. And once you do that, everything changes. I see Heidi's asking, what are the changes I might see on my LSAT? I'm taking it in April. Well, of course, be aware over the recent LSAT changes, no more logic games, and the sometimes lack of dual or comparative reading comp passages. Those are the only changes I would expect that you should already be aware of, I hope. But aside from that, I mean, they're not going to start scoring the writing sample in April. The earliest point at which they might score it would be August. of this year, if not next year, but it's not that change they will announce in advance, and it's not going to happen for those taking it in April or taking it in June. I'm not expecting any other changes to the test. And by the way, I mean the inclusion of more formal logic, more conditional reasoning, that has been a subtle change to the LSAT over time ever since the removal of the logic games section. And so you can expect more formal logic, more conditional logic, more chains, more quantitative reasoning, questions comparing numbers versus percentages. You can expect more of those than you might see on a lot of the published practice tests, but that would not be a fundamental change to the LSAT, just a more subtle change in emphasis from the previous practice tests, that, or at least some of them. So you might want to study those a bit more than you would have otherwise, but that's pretty much it. I'm not expecting anything else. I see Chelsea's asking, I graduated 14 years ago with a 2.5 undergraduate GPA and a subpar LSAT. Will my work experience hold weight? I mean, law schools always look at your work experience, and if it's impressive, of course, that's certainly going to help. But if your GPA, to be frank, is going to be below most, if not all, law school medians, and a subpar LSAT by definition is not great. And so I wouldn't want you to over-index your work experience or place too much emphasis on that. I think that you should be thinking about retaking the LSAT to offset the GPA. And by the way, the longer you've been out of undergrad, the less your undergrad GPA will matter, because who you were back in 2012 is not who you are in 2026, of course. But numbers are still numbers, and the 2.5 GPA does still get reported to the American Bar Association for US News inclusion in the rankings. And so you're going to want to get a superpar LSAT or above median LSAT to offset the lower GPA. So definitely recommend retaking in short. I see Keyshawn saying, hey, I major in criminal justice and it's my second semester. Should I start studying for the LSAT now or focus on my GPA? It's a 3.9 right now. Okay, so your GPA is great. Congrats on that. Definitely maintain it, and if even try to raise it. If you're saying second semester, I'm guessing you're a second semester freshman, so you've still got a couple more years of undergrad, right? So I would recommend maintaining a focus right now on the GPA. Keep it high, get it even higher if you can. And then maybe a year from now, if you're still confident law school's what you want to do, then you start studying for the LSAT. But you don't need to start studying for the LSAT now. Enjoy undergrad, explore law, make sure it's really what you want to do. And if you're totally confident that it is what you want to do, then of course you can start studying for it. But I don't think that you need to start in your freshman year. Your LSAT score is good for 5 years, of course. But some folks end up liking to take a gap year between undergrad and law school, and I wouldn't want your score to expire before you're ready to actually apply. I think that if you start studying as a sophomore and take it as a junior, that's still plenty of planning ahead, and your score will still be good for applying and going direct from law school, undergrad to law school if you want to. But the LSAT's not going anywhere. Law school's not going anywhere. Enjoy undergrad. Maintain a high GPA. Caroline's asking, is a 160 good? I have a master's degree and a 3.97 GPA. So whenever anyone asks me, is this number good or bad? I mean, it's all relative, right? So a 160 is above average, but because the average LSAT score is roughly, I think, a 153, 152 right now. And so a 160 is above that. But is your LSAT score good for the law schools that you want to go to? It's an above average score, but is significantly below the medians of the top 14 law schools. And it might not get you a full ride to a lot of law schools out there. So depending on your goals, you might need a higher LSAT score. But depends on your goals. It's all relative. The master's ultimately doesn't really matter. They'll see it on your resume. They'll see it on your transcript, of course, but law schools only consider your undergraduate GPA for calculation or factoring into their admissions indices, which is the formula they use where they put in your GPA from undergrad and your LSAT score into an admissions index formula. And those are what determine your chances to a large extent. If your 397 GPA is from undergrad, that's awesome. That puts you in really good standing for GPA. We just got to get you potentially a higher LSAT score if you want to get into a top 14 law school or if you want to get a full ride to law school. Kay's asking, I got a 161 and will probably graduate with around a 3.4 GPA. Should I retake the LSAT? Again, depends on your goals, where you want to go to law school. What is the GPA median of the law school you're targeting? What's the LSAT of the median that you're targeting? Because there is so much undergraduate grade inflation, a 3.4 GPA is going to be below a lot of law school medians. And so you're going to want to have a higher LSAT score to compensate. And so depending on the law schools that you're targeting, you might need a higher LSAT. But I would look at the stats. You can Google any law school's name and the number 509. So Yale Law 509, Harvard Law 509, for example, and you'll see their ABA required disclosures. You'll see the LSAT and GPA medians of any given ABA approved law school, and you'll be able to get a better sense of the kinds of numbers that you need in order to be competitive. But you may want to retake, and retaking is okay. Law schools do not average multiple scores. They only take the highest on record. And you could take it in either April or June and apply first thing when applications open in the fall. Ian is asking, is it bad to take a break between college and law school? No, it's not bad. Totally fine. In fact, law schools oftentimes like to see work experience because it shows that you, if it's law experience, then you have real world exposure to the practice of law and that you're not going on a whim. And it can give you more time to decide whether law school is really right for you. However, if you're confident that you want to go right from undergrad into law school, then you can go straight and that's okay too. I see you're taking it February 7th. Okay, so you got roughly a week and a half. I would say at this point, final week before the test, take 1 or 2 practice tests, review them in depth, maybe drill your weak areas on the side. That's all you got to do. Take a day or 2 off so that you don't burn out. We want you to go into the test feeling fresh, feeling confident, feeling ready to crush it. So don't take a practice test every day. Definitely not. That's a recipe for burnout. And of course, make sure that your system is up to date for the Prometric software if you are taking it remotely. Make sure your internet's good if you're taking it remotely. Prepare your government issued photo ID that you have that. Number 2, pencils sharpened, snack ready. Make sure that your roommates or anyone that you live with is not going to disturb you during the test and they're not going to be streaming Netflix or anything. You want your internet to be solid. I see Lada or Liz asking, what's your opinion on having a 3.0 GPA, marketing major, business degree with an LSAT score of 156? In my opinion, those numbers are probably a little bit low for most law schools that are worth attending because you're not going to get into a top tier school with those numbers and you're not going to get a significant scholarship or a full ride from the lower ranked schools with those numbers. Just to be frank, speaking objectively when it comes to the numbers. And your 3.0 GPA is probably pretty fixed at this point. I see that you mentioned that you're already working as a paralegal, so I'm guessing that you're out of undergrad. You're going to want to retake the LSAT to get a higher score to offset what is a relatively lower GPA. Just speaking frankly with you here, because nothing less would serve you. But you can improve on a retake. There's plenty of time and space for you to improve. And I would say, again, take it in April or June, apply first thing when applications open in the fall. You could take it in April as your first target retake, take it in June as a backup, then apply first thing in early September. And I oftentimes recommend that you register for a second LSAT beyond your initial target because it can give you peace of mind. Just for that reason alone, to know that it's not all riding on that one test date because you've got a backup. So let's say for those of you who are already planning on taking it in April, if you were to sign up for June, you're of course spending the roughly $250 on that second registration for June, but it might give you peace of mind going into April to feel less stressed, knowing that even if you have a bad proctor, even if you have tech issues, even if you're experiencing nerves or anxiety or what if you get sick or something, You'll still be able to take it in June. You're not going to miss that June registration deadline, and you can still apply first thing when applications open in the fall. I see TC's asking, I've got a 3.0 GPA. What LSAT score should I shoot for in hopes of getting a scholarship? So like I was mentioning earlier, because there's so much GPA inflation these days, a 3.0 GPA is going to put you below the medians for the vast majority of law schools, if not every law school, I think. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to shoot for a significantly higher LSAT score than you would otherwise to offset the lower GPA. And so if a 3.0 GPA puts you below the 25th percentile for a given law school, then you want to be above the 75th percentile for that law school to balance things out, making you a so-called splitter applicant, relatively higher LSAT, relatively lower GPA. No big deal. Plenty of applicants are so-called splitters. Law schools love splitters. And in fact, if you look at the published law school admissions index for pretty much any given law school out there, you're going to see that they weigh LSAT scores more heavily than undergraduate GPAs because the LSAT score is a more objective metric because of grade inflation. And you have some folks who majored in STEM fields in undergrad, some folks who majored in humanities majors. And the thing is that, of course, STEM majors are a bit rougher when it comes to GPAs. They don't have the same inflation. They're more brutally curved. In contrast, in the humanities, much easier to get a 4.0, right? I had a professor in college who didn't believe in grades, so he just literally gave everybody A's. Literally everybody in the class who put in any effort at all, like you just turned in a paper that was assigned, you'd get an A. So imagine taking only classes like that and getting a 4.0. Do you deserve the 4.0? Do you deserve the A's? Most people don't, of course, but they're still giving them out. And law schools know this, of course. So the LSAT, in contrast, is strictly timed. It's multiple choice. It's a lot more objective. And it's graded on that quote-unquote curve of 120 to 180. And so, of course, it has its issues as well. There is LSAT score inflation, but the LSAT is a more objective metric. It's a better indicator or predictor of first-year law school grades as well as bar passage rates. Of course, it's not destiny. It's not a 1-0 correlation, not perfectly correlated, but it is a relatively better indication of those factors, the first-year law school grades and the bar passage rates. And law schools want to admit folks who are going to pass the bar and who are not going to drop out after the first year. So they weigh LSATs more heavily for those reasons. I see XL SLDs asking, my GPA is a 3.3, but I graduated law school before COVID. I also have a master's degree with some work experience. Do you think it's still worth it to apply to top 14 law schools if my GPA is a 175 or higher? Yeah, I think it's still worth it. If your LSAT's a 175 or above, that will do a lot to offset the 3.3 GPA. Master's degree doesn't really matter. Work experience, they'll see on your record, of course. But yeah, worth applying for sure. See what happens. Shoot your shot. Blanket the T14. Apply to every single top 14 law school if that's where you want to go, and see what happens. You've got a reasonable shot at getting to some of those schools, and of course, also work on your application essays, polish your resume, but you've got a relatively decent application. Joanna is asking, when did schools start inflating GPAs? I mean, that's been going on for decades. I can't say there's a fine dividing line between when they didn't and when they did. It's been going on for decades now, and it's only gotten more severe, worse over time. And law schools are aware of that, but I can't say there's a particular time. And of course, the reasons for the GPA inflation are many, beyond what I would get into here, but I'm sure you can find a lot if you were to search about it. And to your question of LSAT score inflation, LSAT score inflation is basically the fact that there are more people getting high LSAT scores and applying with higher and higher scores. And as a result, LSAT score medians at pretty much every law school are rising over time. So it's getting more competitive. The numbers are getting higher. There are more people with 170 plus scores. And I mentioned earlier that It's in part due to the rise in LSAT accommodations. LSAC has become more liberal in giving out extra time on the LSAT, giving extra breaks for some folks on the LSAT who will apply for accommodations due to having ADHD or anxiety. As a result, LSAC gives them more time on the exam than is standard. And when you have more time, it's easy to get a higher score. Additionally, you have the rise in retakes. More and more people are retaking the LSAT because it's offered more frequently than it used to be. The LSAT used to be offered only 4 times a year, but they now offer it 8 times a year. And when there are more LSAT administrations, it becomes more convenient to retake it, so more people do. And because the LSAT scores are not averaged and they only consider the highest score on your record, you then have more people with more scores. The highest score only matters, leads to scores rising as well. Other questions coming in here? And please, of course, keep them coming. Happy to help. Delia is asking, I got a 146 and my GPA is a 346. Should I try to apply to some law schools or should I wait a cycle? I mean, look at the medians for the schools that you're targeting, but those numbers sound a little bit low to me, to be frank. They're going to be below the LSAT medians and below the GPA medians for most, if not all, law schools. And so, in my personal opinion, at the risk of sounding elitist, I don't think there are any law schools that are worth going to with those numbers. Most law schools you won't get in, and the lowest ranked law schools might technically accept you, but the lowest ranked schools, the problem with them is that their employment outcomes are not very good. Their bar passage rates are also not very good. I would call them predatory law schools, to be frank, meaning they're taking advantage of folks. They're marketing themselves as providing a good education. Whether they do is questionable. I'm not sure that you're getting a good return on your investment going to a school like that. And they're not going to give you much, if any, scholarship money. So I would wait a cycle. I would retake the LSAT just to get better outcomes. So retake the LSAT. If you can apply with a much higher score, you'll get better outcomes with admissions. I see Matthew's asking, are the months of March, May, and July the months without LSAT administrations? I'm new to studying and I haven't taken a practice benchmark yet. Yeah, so the LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we've got February, April, and June as the next published LSAT administrations. February being in a week and a half, April being 10 weeks from now, June being 4.5 months. LSAC has not yet published the LSAT administrations for the second half of 2026. Last year, they offered it in August, September, October, and November, 4 consecutive months. I think they're starting to standardize the LSAT administrations now, so my expectation is that they will also offer it those same months of August, September, October, November in 2026 and beyond, but they haven't yet released that, and who knows, they could surprise us. But yeah, for now, we know they're not going to be offering it in March and April and May at the very least. If you're new to studying, totally fine. Take a practice test, take a cold diagnostic, see where you're at. Don't take that as being indicative of your potential, of course. All it's going to tell you is that you have not yet studied for the LSAT, and there's work to do, but of course you can improve significantly when you put in the time. And if you want to talk through what your study plan should look like, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everyone watching this. Happy to help, happy to talk you through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack. I see Dylan's asking, can you talk a little bit about scholarship negotiations? My LSAT was right at the median, but my GPA was slightly lower. I did not even get a 25% scholarship. Okay, so when it comes to scholarship negotiations, ideally you want to be in a strong negotiation position at the start by having strong numbers. So if you have an LSAT score above the median of the school that you're targeting, if you have a GPA above the median at the school to which you're targeting, you are in a relatively good position to get scholarship money. If your numbers are only at the median or below the median, they're not as likely to give you scholarships because you are not improving their rankings. Ideally, they want people with stronger numbers above their medians, and those are the people who get offered more money. And so to improve your negotiation position, you have a couple options. You can retake the LSAT, come back at them with a higher score, then the circumstances will have changed, and so you'll be in a better position to get scholarship money. Alternatively, if you have applied to multiple schools, which you should, you can then play them off each other. If school A didn't offer you much, if any, money, but school B offered you more money, you can then go to school A and say, I'd love to go to your school instead, but school offered me more and financials are real. Money is a reality for me. Can you match or exceed their offer? And maybe they will. Maybe they won't, but at least you'll have tried. But if you retake the LSAT, come back at them with higher numbers, you then might get more money, and plenty of people do that every single year. I think that a lot of people don't realize that retaking the LSAT is not just for getting into law school. It's also for negotiating and getting more money. In other words, even if you've been accepted to law school, you can still retake the LSAT and update them with a higher number and then get more money out of them as a result. Plenty of people do that every year and earn tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships by retaking and coming back with higher numbers. Betsy's asking, what if your MBA GPA is good, but your bachelor's GPA is low? Yeah, so unfortunately, law schools do not consider any grad level GPAs. They only consider your undergraduate GPA, in part because not everybody went to grad school, not everybody has a grad GPA. And so in order to better compare applicants, make it more apples to apples, they only consider anybody's undergraduate GPA, and presumably they assume that your grad level GPA being more specialized, that you're going to do better in it because you chose that topic entirely. Whereas in undergrad, you have various requirements and such. And so if your bachelor's GPA is lower, then you want to compensate with having a higher LSAT. I see that your LSAT is a 154. You want to reach 160 on your February retake. Yeah, I think that's a good move, but aim higher. Why not aim for 180, right? Get your LSAT as high as possible to compensate for the relatively lower GPA. I see Drift is asking, are testing accommodations less accommodating than before? Yeah, so I think the LSAC has, starting with this cycle start in July, by the way, they've done a little bit to make it tougher to get the same level of accommodations they were giving out. So they've reduced the ease with which you can get triple time or take the LSAT over the course of 2 days, for example. It's now more you can get time and a half and you can get double time, but beyond that becomes a bit trickier. They've changed the categorizations a little bit from previous years. And when it comes to getting LSAC fee waivers, I would just Google the requirements. I don't know the particulars off the top of my head, and those are shifting each year as well. I think it's related to some extent to the federal poverty line. I see Wesley's asking, I scored a 155 on a practice test with no studying, and I still have 2 years till I take the LSAT. Do I have good potential? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 155 is a great starting score. You can improve significantly from there, especially if you have 2 years. I mean, even in just 2.5 months for those taking it in April, you can improve a lot. But in 2 years, literally anything is possible. I personally started off at a 152 on my cold diagnostic. I ended up with a 175 ultimately. It took me an entire year, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I'd done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months, because the LSAT's all about patterns, right? So if you can understand the patterns in the design of the exam, if you understand the tricks and traps that the test makers use, you can then better spot the patterns in the tricks and traps, and you can avoid them. And so the more you study, the more practice tests you take, the more questions you complete, the better able you will be to spot those tricks and traps. And the good news is that LSAC has, of course, released literally thousands of practice questions on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 practice tests for free. The others you get with your Law Hub Advantage subscription. Well worth the investment. It's $120 for a full year of access to those practice tests. And considering the value in getting even 1 point more on the LSAT, I think by some calculations, 1 point on the LSAT is worth $5,000 in scholarship money. And so well worth investing in your LSAT prep to get a higher score, get into better law schools, get more scholarship money, because it sets the entire trajectory of the rest of your legal career. If you get into a better law school, you get better employment outcomes. And if you get a higher score and get more scholarship money, you're getting discounts on your tuition, taking on less debt, and then you'll be better situated to do what you truly want to do with your legal career. In other words, a lot of folks go into law school idealistic, wanting to change the system, be part of the change. Certainly big need for that these days with what's going on in current events in the federal government and such. And so I want to see more folks going into public interest. But the problem is that when you have to take on 6 figures in debt for law school, you graduate with crippling debt, you might end up changing your idealism and instead going into big law, which we don't necessarily need a whole lot more of. And of course, everyone's got their financial realities, and I don't criticize anybody for wanting to take on better paying jobs to pay off that debt. But if you can avoid the debt in the first place, that's a better route to go. Now, one thing you should be aware of is that the federal government has eliminated the Grad Plus loans. This will affect everybody starting law school this fall. And so what that means is that there's going to be a cap on how much you can borrow for law school. The cap is $50,000 per year. But because the average cost of attendance is $84,000 per year, considering sticker price of law school tuition, plus living expenses, plus mandatory fees and books and such, there's a big gap in terms of how much you can borrow versus the cost of attendance. And so you need to get those discounts on your tuition. You need those merit scholarships to reduce what you pay for law school so that you will be better able to afford it between your savings and the loans that you would take out. And the way that you get those discounts on your tuition, the way that you get the big scholarships and the full ride is by getting a higher LSAT score above the medians, which is why I don't just talk about getting into the best ranked law school. I think in many cases, it's better to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. So in many cases, you want to go for scholarships over prestige. The exception would be if you really want to go into big law, or you want to get a judicial clerkship, if you want to go work at the Supreme Court, for example, the Harvard, Yale, Stanford, or feeders for those kinds of outcomes. But other schools, of course, you're going to get more scholarships. Harvard and Yale do not give out merit aid, by the way. They only give out an aid based on financial need. I see Drift is asking, is a 3.8 GPA as competitive as a 3.9 or a 4.0 GPA for a top law school? By definition, it's not, right? So by definition, higher numbers are more competitive than lower numbers. And I hate to be technical about this, but facts are facts, right? So the top 14 law schools all have GPA medians of 3.9 or higher, roughly. And so a 3.8 would actually put you below the GPA medians. In contrast, a 4.0 would put you above the GPA medians. And so technically speaking, whenever you are below one median, like a GPA median, you want to be above the other median, like the LSAT median, to compensate for that. So if your undergrad GPA is in fact a 3.8, you want to have above a 175 ideally to be above the LSAT median if you're looking at top 14 law schools. I see Creasy's asking, is it too late to apply for fall of 2026? No, it is not too late. For those of you who just got your January LSAT scores back today and you're applying now, you're happy with your score, congrats. You can apply today, tomorrow, Friday, and you're not too late for this cycle. Ideally, you're at this point, you're wrapping up your application essays, putting a bow on them, you have your letters of rec already, your resume is done, and you're hitting submit today or tomorrow at the latest, ideally. If you are taking the February LSAT, though, that also is not too late for this cycle. You take it February 7th or so, your score comes back February 25th, and you're ready to hit submit on the 25th, ideally. And you work on your applications in that 2 to 3 week gap between taking the LSAT and getting your score back. And by the way, for those of you who are taking the LSAT in February, you have a great window there during that 2 to 3 week gap where you are working on your applications. I wouldn't just sit back and take it easy during that time. That's the time to finalize everything and hit submit. I see Selim's asking, I understand that scholarships are more important than prestige when it comes to law schools, and I'd say that in most cases. But do employers hold the better law schools to a higher standard? I guess what you're asking here is, do they value the prestige and the reputation of the school greatly? Yeah, they value it a lot, but it depends on the employer, right? So if you want to work in big law, the white shoe law firms, then yeah, they will value the highest ranked law schools. They are hiring out of the top 6, like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Cornell, NYU law schools. But if you are not married to the idea of going to those law schools in particular, then it might make sense for you to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money. That might be the better choice in that case. So you got to know, what are your outcomes, what are your goals, and then act accordingly. And if you do want to go into big law, by the way, as Polo's asking here, I wouldn't go to an online law school. You want to go the more traditional route because that's more respected in many cases for the top tier law firms, for the big law firms, the white shoe firms. But if you want to work at a regional firm, if you want to open your own practice or work at a family firm, that sort of thing may not matter. We are actually going to have an admissions expert joining us who can handle some of the questions around employment and, of course, getting into the best law school, not looking at just your LSAT score, but also looking at your application essays, your personal statement, your resume, your addenda, your letters of rec. I'm really excited to have us joining with us today, Christina Chong, who worked in admissions at Harvard Law and also NYU Law. I think she'll be a great expert here to help us out. See if Christina is on the line. Christina, are you ready to join us? How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. How are you?
Okay. Let me just change that. Can you hear me, Steve?
Yep, I can hear you fine. Welcome, Christina. Thank you for joining.
Wonderful. It's so great to see you. Thank you so much for having me on LSAT Unplugged.
Of course, my pleasure, Christina. Thank you for joining. So if you could just share a bit with us about your background, your experience working in admissions, what you did there, and then how you help applicants now.
Hey, wonderful. Yeah, so I formerly was an admissions reader at the Office of JD Admissions at Harvard Law School, and then later I was assistant director of JD Admissions at NYU School of Law. I've worked full-time in admissions consulting since 2017, and I started my company of Renaissance Admissions Consulting in 2021.
Fantastic, great. And so when you worked in admissions, what exactly were you doing when it came to reviewing applications and resumes? How did you evaluate them?
Sure. So at the time, especially at NYU School of Law, they were kind of sorted loosely by, LSAT, test scores, GPA, and then certain readers were assigned. So there were about 5 of us on the team, and we would look through that. And then my job was to look through, decide if there's anyone I would recommend for possibly admitting, and then eventually the dean of admissions would decide whether or not to admit. And then sometimes there would be feedback from faculty as well.
Okay, fantastic. Great. And when it came to reviewing applications, what were some common mistakes that you saw applicants making on their essays, for example?
Sure. So essays are such a huge part of the process because a lot of the law schools don't interview. NYU Law can interview for certain scholarships, but they don't, as a rule, interview everybody. So only if you're being considered for one of those merit scholarships. So a lot of the times I would see that the story would really need reframing. So a lot of it is how you tell your story. And so often the essays, that one time they get to hear your own voice and why you're going to law school. So I feel it's pretty essential to say why you want to go to law school. There's a time it didn't matter as much, maybe 20 years ago, but now with so many people applying, you need to get your voice out there. You need to really make your case why law school makes sense for you right now.
Do you think the applicants need to literally explain why they want to go to law school in their essays specifically, or is it okay to talk about other topics?
I think these days you really should focus on why you want to go to law school. I think there's a time you could talk about personal characteristics and, like, I'm a really diligent person, I'm into this. But these days, I feel with the number of people applying and, law schools are having lots of people to choose from, you need to get into really why this makes sense for you right now and what you've done so far that illustrates you would succeed there.
Hmm. Are you seeing any cliche topics these days?
Cliche. I mean, everyone's story is a little bit different. Like, I've never seen the exact same story come across, but I would say not necessarily a cliche topic, but it's the way you focus on it, the way you bring it out. So I just, the experience from being in admissions, you want to tell the story in a way that engages the reader, stays focused, but also talks about overcoming any obstacles if you have them, and then how you came through it so that you can do well later in life.
Hmm. Right. Are there any big traps you see students or applicants falling into? I mean, I'm thinking about cliche topics in terms of like politics being a potential minefield, for example, which is tricky because I know that so many people want to go to law school because of what's happening these days in the federal government, in current events, in politics. But are there any risks inherent in that? And how would you recommend navigating that?
Yes, certainly. I think that there's a lot of different topics that could be controversial, but it's just the way you handle how you talk about them. So it's not to say a topic's completely off limits, but you want it to come across in a way that you would be a good addition to their law school class. So maybe you have a completely different perspective than the person next to you in the classroom. They want to hear different perspectives, but can you politely state your perspective and get along with people? There's a lot of essays I find now about civil discourse, like ability to hear different viewpoints, and I think that schools have a lot of flexibility with changing topics. I'm noticing a lot more optional topics these days, but they're not always optional in my mind. They want to hear, how are you going to behave in the classroom in a way that's respectful to your classmates and community.
Hmm. Right. So when you talk about the optional essays, what you're saying is that an applicant should definitely write the essay. Is that what you're suggesting?
In a lot of cases, I'm not saying like every single case. Certainly, there are times when they're asking about a personal experience essay, and maybe the applicant doesn't feel like they have anything beyond what they mentioned in their personal statement. But a place like Harvard Law School does require sort of a experience essay. And there's the 2-page why law really, and the 2-page life experience essay. So you need to come up with something. But there are a bunch of schools that have lots of optional essays, and I do generally recommend that you write at least one of them to show interest.
Hmm. Right. Okay. Gotcha. And so, let's say an applicant's applying to 10 or 12 schools. Do you think that's too many to apply to, given all the optional essays one might have to write?
No, not necessarily. I think a lot of people do apply to that number. I mean, it really depends on what they're going for. I do have students that are really into the T14, the top 14 law schools based on US News rankings. But if you're just planning to practice in your state, you might not need a list of 10 to 12 schools. I've had people apply to 5 schools, and that's fine. But, sometimes people have a much bigger list because they have special circumstances. Maybe they're really going for scholarships, or, they, want to have, they're non-traditional and they just want to see what their chances are, and they're not sure how it will play out. So they'll have a big list.
Right. Right. Of course. What's the top trap you see applicants falling into in your work, and how do you help them avoid that, or what do you recommend?
I guess sometimes I would say trap in that I think they need to do their research. I think sometimes, people get blinded by the rankings, and they're not entirely like the reason they should be going to law school. Yes, I know that going to a certain law school might be easier to get a certain kind of job, but I've had students hire me to transfer. I didn't necessarily help them with their first JD application process because they realized in law school that they wanted something completely different than their law school offered. Like, maybe it was in a state they did actually found out, look, I don't really want to practice here. And the majority of people that go to this school practice in this state, or maybe they really don't have much of an offering in the type of law I want to do, and it's just really minimal, so I want to transfer. So I think sometimes in the process, people get really into just applying, but then they're not really doing the research. Like, go visit the schools if you are able to do that. Like, you get a lot more of the sense. And, I've had people completely change their minds about where to go after going to admitted student days. And in their head, they really wanted this school. And then when they got to that school, they're like, oh my goodness, the people were so pretentious. I didn't really see, myself being part of them. Like, they were so competitive. And then I went to this other school, and, it was just so much more relaxed and laid back. And I already met people that I feel could be my roommates. So a lot of that comes down to that gut feeling when you show up on campus. And, do you feel like this could be a community you would thrive in and be happy at?
That makes perfect sense, of course. I mean, I think that a lot of people visit schools for undergrad, but they don't realize that maybe they can and should visit for law as well. I mean, you are going to be spending 3 years there. And if anything, I mean, law becomes, once you go to grad school, like law school, for example, it becomes more impactful for the remainder of your career than undergrad was, right?
It can be. And, obviously some people feel college was like the most amazing experience. And then grad school is more a means to an end. Like, I'm going to get my degree and I'm going to practice. But, it's a big deal where you go to graduate school. I mean, some people might just, see it as a career path, but, you want to meet people. You want to have people you can spend time with and support you. And some people say that their best friends come from grad school just because, maybe they're a little bit more mature and, know better what they want, and they're more further along. And so, I didn't go to law school, but my grad school people, I feel like I stay in touch with much more than in college personally.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the timing for this cycle right now? I mean, my take on this is that things have kind of shifted later over time, so that January and February are not too late for this cycle, but April might be overall, broadly speaking. What do you think about that?
I'm of the opinion that I think earlier is better. I don't think September is necessary. I do sometimes hear people say, I really want to get them in September, and I don't feel like you need to do that. But I generally do recommend before Thanksgiving, just to have more access to scholarships, and like the other cycle. And people don't, this isn't always the case, but sometimes they hear back earlier too if they apply earlier. So there's more acceptances, and maybe you don't have to apply to as many schools if you hear early in your application process. But not to say there's still plenty of schools that still are taking applications. And so, but I generally don't recommend waiting till the very end, because I, had a client at a previous company I worked at, and they procrastinated so much that despite much advice, they waited till the day of the deadline to apply. And I think they would have had a lot more choices if they had applied a couple months earlier, but they got one acceptance. And I'm glad they had one acceptance, but I really feel they would have had several more if they had just applied 2 months earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You only need one, but outcomes are better when you apply earlier. I guess, I mean, I would agree with you that applying earlier is better when at all possible. But at the same time, I mean, there's an opportunity cost for having to delay everything an entire year, right? Because it's another year in the status quo versus another year as an attorney. Are you seeing this cycle kind of slowing? I feel like the decisions are taking really, really long time to come back this cycle.
Yeah, I agree. I think decisions are taking a while to come back. And I think there have just been so many changes recently in higher education. And so I think schools are kind of navigating, okay, they want to see who's applying, since the deadlines are still pending. But they also don't want to they don't want to show their cards too earlier, because I think what happened during the pandemic is they didn't expect, so many people to apply, and a lot of these places over-enrolled students. And so I even had like places like Columbia paying, students to defer a year or two and paying them like $15,000 to do that, because they just couldn't, have all these students come at once. So I think they like holding their cards till later in the cycle. And so they don't have too many acceptances. And then they go to the wait list a lot, because if they offer a spot from the wait list, they often say, you can't defer, you can't wait a year, you got to take it now. So it's easier for them to control the flow and their yield management that way.
Yeah, I remember it was huge when Columbia was giving out all that money to wait a year. For some folks, that made a lot of sense, but then there's the opportunity cost as well. We've got a great question here in the chat, and folks, feel free to drop in any questions for Christina here. I see Drift is asking, do curveball applicants stand out? What makes an applicant memorable?
I think it's unique to the applicant, but I remember when I was reading files, and at the time was like on an iPad, and maybe I'd be reading 100 a day. I think passion and feeling authentic comes a long way. And maybe if you've done things that are a little bit out of the ordinary. I mean, certainly there have been a lot of people who've been paralegals, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was a paralegal as well back in the day. But if you've done something a little bit different, and so I mean, if it's you've taught English in another country, or maybe you started a company and you really got to do some amazing work with that. So I think I really do argue for a bit of work experience if possible. I know there are a lot of people applying straight from college because there's fears in the job market and being able to land an entry-level job. But I do think the more time you have outside of college, the more time you have to distinguish yourself and, build a path and like really, tell a story that you're really excited about this next step.
Right, of course. So, I mean, basically, do something impressive that you can then talk about in your essays, and then also just explore whether law school feels right for you in general. I feel like some folks, when they go straight from undergrad, they haven't necessarily explored what the practice of law might actually be like. And so, working as a paralegal might not be a bad idea.
Or just gaining life experience.
Yeah, work experience in general as well, of course. Yeah. Are there any particular examples that stand out to you of applicants you've worked with or applicants you reviewed when you were in admissions that stood out, made somebody memorable, made them more desirable to the school?
I think for me, I mean, everyone's different. We all have biases, right? So I would say, like one person might want this, one person, but I love the people who overcome obstacles. And, maybe they didn't necessarily have the easiest path there, but, they were able to, really like overcome that and like tell this story of how they're able to do that and then also give back. So, certainly like law school has a lot of different kinds of people wanting to practice law. If they do want to practice law, obviously not everybody ends up practicing law, going to law school, but, as telling a story about like corporate law isn't as exciting, honestly. Like even if there's a lot of people who want to do that, it just doesn't come across quite as, you don't necessarily have to save the world, but I think some of the more niche areas of law kind of stand out more because they're rare. And so something like patent law really can be a huge benefit in admissions because, there aren't as many people with those STEM skills to be able to do patent law.
Yeah, for sure. That makes, and patent law I think is really desirable these days just because of the way the economy is going. STEM folks have a unique advantage as well, I think, because they're very employable. They're going to get definitely getting JD required jobs, getting good pay as well, reflecting well in the school, becoming donors in the future. We've got a bit of a spicy question here from Tom asking, are these statements vetted? Like how much can I just fabricate experiences? Not a great idea in general, but hypothetically, let's say that one applicant's concerned that somebody else might do that.
Sure. I mean, certainly, there is a little bit of an honor system going, but they don't have the time to check every single application's facts. I mean, you do certify when you submit an application that, this is true and correct to the best of your knowledge. And so if they do find out that there was a part of your application that was fabricated, certainly, I mean, I would imagine the admissions would be rescinded. And there was a recent case actually for Yale University where a freshman showed up on campus a few months ago and the roommates got suspicious. They believe one roommate looked at their luggage tag and saw that the name didn't match like the name they gave. And it turned out they had basically made up their entire high school profile. So yes, they got escorted off campus and, expelled. So just say, certainly I really recommend telling the truth. That's what's happening. Also, the practice of law, in order to, pass the bar, you do need to be checked. So, I haven't gone through that process since I'm not an attorney, but they do go through your admissions file and they go through, your history. And so it's really important to be honest in your interactions as a future professional.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I think the stakes are actually higher in some ways for law because, as you mentioned, you have to go before the bar. And so imagine that someone goes through 3 years of law school, spends the 3 years of their life, pays all the tuition, does all that work, and then they get found out. Now they can't be an attorney. They can't pass the character and fitness, for example. And then they did all that for no ability to work. They don't get the JD. They don't have the bar accreditation.
Exactly. So it's really key in the field of law to be able to, represent your clients and, be accurate and honest.
Yeah, we got a question here from Selim asking, I'm working towards getting my paralegal certificate from an ABA approved school. Would it be smart to work as a paralegal while in law school?
Yeah, so great question. I think certainly there's paralegal is great exposure to the field of law. Certainly you get a lot of exposure to the day to day. I do think there is some hesitation that during law school you're going to be really busy. So sorry. And so I think, you also want to have time to have really strong grades, be able to do other things. So certainly going part-time in law school is helpful, but if you're going full-time, it is kind of hard to juggle another job on top of that. So it's a personal choice, but I do think obviously with like loan changes that are happening for grad school, in which there's a cap of $200,000 for loans for the unsubsidized loans, I think that there's probably going to be more people wanting to go part-time and work.
Exactly, just making it more manageable. Yeah, but also some law schools when you're going full time, they're not going to even going to let you work in many cases, right?
Right. There is.
Yeah, we have a question about AI written essays. I mean, what are your thoughts on using AI or ChatGPT to maybe not write it for you, of course, but to help in some way? Is there any way to use these things for good, or should they be avoided at all costs? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think each consultant kind of has a different opinion. I think for the purpose of generating application materials, I would avoid AI. So I think it's okay for like researching certain schools, learning more about them for your own personal, decision making. But I think when it actually comes to application materials, like your resume and especially your essays, I don't think AI knows your story better than you do. AI certainly has its limitations in terms of, knowing your story and how to tell it. I think the writing is pretty clunky right now. It's pretty obvious, like when it's AI in most cases. And then some law schools just outright ban AI from your essays. So you have to check each school. But Michigan does let you use AI for and they want you to like say that. But most law schools aren't going to allow for that. So you definitely have to research each school, and each cycle might be different. But generally for my clients, I say no AI for, essays, no AI for application materials themselves.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. As you said, it's very clunky. It's a very particular trademark style that's pretty easily detectable. And even if you couldn't, even the question of whether you could prove someone used AI or not doesn't matter. I mean, basically, to me, it's like, is the writing good or not? And does it seem AI? If so, it doesn't check out really. Like you want to feel authentic because it's a good chance to build a connection with admissions in the way that the numbers don't tell that story, right? We have a good
Exactly.
yeah, we have a good follow-up from someone here asking, what about using it just as a proofreader to catch small grammatical errors?
I can see that, but I think it is a slippery slope, right? I mean, they don't necessarily catch anything. And sometimes, yeah, with anything like a spell check, they don't always 100% accurately, use writing in the way that we do, right? Because English is a complicated language. There's so many different rules that are broken over and over again because, it's so combined with so many different other words from other languages. So, when I go through spell check, I use spell check, but I have to really check every instance of grammar. I'm like, I don't agree with that. That's not really how we talk. So, I mean, you could, but you definitely want to make sure it's not changing the language in such a way that it sounds like AI.
Yeah, true. Is there any other advice you might have for applicants? Anything you think that we haven't covered that you want to share with everyone watching right now?
Sure. Let's see. So in terms of law school, I mean, certainly it's a very high volume cycle right now. And I think in times of economic uncertainty and people being nervous about jobs and the impact of AI, like people want to rush into law school. But I feel that you don't necessarily have to apply straight from college. I'm feeling that there's a trend of more people applying direct from college because they don't want to, they're fearful that there might not be a job waiting for them after graduation. Certainly, law school is a huge investment. It's a lot of time. It's at least 3 years of your life usually. It could be less, it could be more, depending on what kind of program you do. But do your research. You don't have to go to law school just because you're nervous that something. And so, really, in the cases where I work with clients, I want to be pretty sure this is what they want. So it's not something they're doing by default because of the fear. It's because they really want to. So that's another thing. You don't have to go to law school, and that's another thing. I decided not to go. I didn't apply. I thought about it, but with the clients that I do work with for law school, I know that this is a path they've really done a lot of research on, that they really are looking to complete and, practice. So there are other options besides law school that don't cost as much.
I think it's really wise advice. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go to law school. It might not make sense under every single circumstance, but There are cases where it does, of course, and so just do your due diligence, research the schools, make sure that you're going to be competitive based on your numbers and your story that you have to tell. And if so, then it could be a go.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, take that time, figure out what you want to do. And sometimes I do ask clients in consultations, why do you want to go to law school? And they might say something like, oh, well, I hate doing this. That's not really an answer to go to law school. So, take your time. It's okay to have a little uncertainty. It's okay to take the time to figure out what it is you really want.
Right, of course. Fantastic. Well, do you want to leave some folks with any words on how they could reach you if they're interested in your services, talking through how you might be able to help them?
Yeah, of course. So my website is www.renaissanceadmconsulting.com. You can reach me there. And, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you, Steve, on LSAT Unplugged. And, I work with JD clients as well as dental and college clients.
Amazing. We'll definitely encourage folks to check you out and reach out to you for more support. Thanks so much for joining us, Christina. Really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome, Steve. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks for having me.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks for all your great questions for Christina, everybody. I see some more questions coming into the chat here. I'll get to as many as I can. Feel free to keep them coming. I'm happy to support anyone on anything. LSAT retake, admissions. I know that we've got a couple LSAT test dates coming up. We've got April, June, and of course, February in the very short term. If you're looking for support, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Open offer. I see more questions here. Selim's asking, what are the most beneficial types of internships to acquire under my resume before my application this fall? So you've got roughly 7 months till applications open. Applications typically open September 1st, and we're at the tail end of January right now. So you do have time to do an internship. I'm not sure that's the best thing that you need to be doing right now, though. So I guess my question is, are your numbers already competitive? Do you already have the LSAT score? And do you already have the GPA, ideally above the medians of the schools to which you're considering? If not, if your LSAT is not above the median, then it might make sense for you to take the time that you would have devoted to your internship and instead devote it to the LSAT prep. Because the LSAT's the biggest factor in admissions. If you're not yet above the threshold for the LSAT, internship could be a waste of time and could be distracting you from what really matters. I find that oftentimes when students are asking, who should I get letters of rec from? What should I write my essay about? Should I go out and get an internship if I don't have a legal internship yet? I'm like, well, are you just procrastinating from the LSAT? Maybe you're not, in which case we could talk about that. But first and foremost, do you have the LSAT score? And if you're still an undergrad, do you have the GPA? Maybe you should devote some time to raising your GPA. And the internship would adversely affect your GPA, which would harm your application overall, because LSAT and GPA are the two biggest things. So get the LSAT score, get the GPA, then look at the internship. And I see you're saying you don't have the score yet. Okay, so get the score first. And you could get the score by April or June, then do the internship over the summer. Now, to answer your question directly, assuming that you did have the numbers, for anyone watching this who might find it helpful, I mean, law schools love to see law-related work experience. If you have work experience as a paralegal, for example, or in some political legal capacity, like as a casework intern for a politician, for example, that could be great. I actually interned for a member of Congress and found it super interesting. And that was law-related. It wasn't at a law firm, but I was able to see behind the scenes what members of Congress do when it comes to doing casework for their constituents, basically helping their constituents liaise with federal government agencies. And you could write about that in your application essays, of course. That might be good to explore, but literally any sort of work experience or internship could be useful for your application. It's a matter of how you tell that story. Is there any anecdote? Is there any experience that you have that could give admissions some more color, some perspective on who you are as an individual? Help them like you better. Because so many other parts of the application are quantitative, your LSAT's a number, your GPA is a number. Those are the biggest things. But if you don't have the numbers or you're kind of on the edge, whether they like you can make a difference. And of course, you can get them to like you through interviewing with them, having a live conversation. If you're not able to interview, then you can, of course, get them to like you through your essays. Essays will not outperform terrible numbers, but they could be a tiebreaker. And by the way, even schools that do not offer interviews, you can still get an interview with them in the form of an informational interview where you reach out to them and you say, hey, I'd love to go to your school. I've been looking things up. I have a couple of questions that weren't covered on the website. Are you able to get on a quick call with me to discuss? If you're not asking last minute, and if you ask nicely, they will almost always say yes. And then during that call, you make a positive impression on them. You come in with well-researched and nuanced questions that cannot be answered on their website, like what's your LSAT median? Because you can find that easily by Googling. But more particular questions about clinics and professors and stuff like that. Like that might be a good thing to talk about. And then, or employment outcomes. And then in that conversation, you can, of course, share a bit about yourself. So maybe the interview is actually an easier way to build rapport than doing an internship, which would take multiple hours a week for multiple weeks to maybe get some material for an essay. I see user 7261's asking, I got 1 point lower on the January LSAT than the November LSAT. Sorry to hear that. Should I cancel my score? Doesn't really matter whether you cancel or not. Cancellations are just an artifact of back when law schools averaged multiple scores. They no longer do. And so only the higher score is going to matter. So the truth is that it really doesn't matter. Do whatever feels better for you. The November score is what's going to count for admissions purposes. Riley's asking, I got a 156 on the LSAT and I'm crashing out. So I'm guessing you don't love the score. I mean, you can retake, right? I mean, there are several retake opportunities. If you're already signed up for February, you could do that. If not, there's April or June and beyond. And if you score higher, great. If not, no big deal. And of course, you can score higher, and you hopefully will score higher if you change the way in which you prep. So I'm curious to know, how did you study before? Did you take a course? Did you get coaching? Did you only self-study? How many hours per week did you study? How many weeks or months did you study for? Is there a resource or a type of support that you did not take advantage of before that you could take advantage of now that would get your score higher? If you give yourself 10 weeks till April, plenty of room to improve. I can't promise overnight success in just a week and a half till February, but if you give yourself 2 to 4 months for April or June, there's plenty of time to get that score up. And it might mean applying next cycle, but could be worth the delay if you can get into better schools, better outcomes, if you can get that score up by 10, 15, 20 points, which is possible, by the way. Just scanning through here for more questions in the chat. Feel free to keep them coming. Tom Wilson saying, I have difficulty building up challenges to overcome for personal statements. Pretty normal life. I don't think that you need to build up challenges. And if you don't have a challenge that comes to mind, then you don't need to write about one. Not every essay has to be boilerplate challenge template. But I think that most people have had some sort of hardship at some point. If you just think through the different phases of your life, doesn't have to be recent, could be years ago, could be getting bullied in middle school, just to make up something. But it could also be just you could take on a challenge and then talk about that. Running a marathon is taking on a challenge, for example. Doesn't have to be that you had financial stresses necessarily. But the way I think about it more is like, is there some colorful anecdote that sheds perspective on who you are as an individual, shows a bit of your personality, shows what your values are? So for example, like I mentioned earlier, I interned for a member of Congress. I could have written an essay about the work I did interning for a member of Congress, helping a constituent. Not my challenge. It could be the constituent's challenge, but what I learned or got out of that experience. Just scanning through for more questions here. Someone was asking about online law schools. And so you have a number of law schools that offer online rather than in person. Some of them are fully online. Some are hybrid. For example, St. Mary's Law School in Texas is 100% online. A lot of folks want to go there for that reason. And so actually, it could be harder to get into that school than their published medians might reflect, because the published medians are including in-person students, whereas online is much more selective due to high demand, given the limited number of slots and given that there are few students who are going to law school online. You then have other programs like Syracuse, Mitchell Hamlin. There are a handful of them. I think there's roughly a dozen schools that offer some sort of online education, either partial or full. And of course, for big law, that might not be the feeder school to go to, but for if you just want to get a JD and you don't necessarily care about the reputation or the prestige of the school, but relocating is going to make it prohibitively difficult, that might be worth exploring. And for the hybrid programs, the way it works is that you're doing most of it online, but you're visiting the campus a couple of times each semester to have some in-person component. So you're flying out there maybe 4 times a semester, 5 times a semester, just here and there, but you're mostly able to remain living at home. But yeah, worth exploring. And I think that I'm glad that the ABA is providing this sort of provisional accreditation for online schools. And I think it's only going to grow over time. There's certainly the need for it. And as law schools look to source more applicants because of the coming demographic cliff, they're going to need to get more creative with finding ways to fill their seats. And so for those who are not aware, there's a coming demographic cliff in higher education that poses an existential threat for both law schools and universities in general. Basically, ever since the 2008 financial crisis, the birth rate in the US has declined precipitously, 20%, and that never came back even after the crisis ended. And so as a result, there are fewer people entering college now, which means fewer people entering law school in the next few years. But law schools are of a size to accommodate a given number of students and maintain a certain degree of selectivity. And with fewer applicants, they either need to reduce class sizes or lower their standards. The higher ranked schools like Harvard and Yale and such, they'll still be fine, of course. They've got massive endowments and they will always be able to maintain their seats with a pretty good degree of selectivity because they have the brand. But for the mid-tier schools, the lower ranked schools, it poses a major problem for them because they are tuition dependent. And so they can't fall back on their endowments. They need the tuition from a given number of students to maintain their overhead, to maintain their administrations and bureaucracies and such. But if they lower their standards, they're going to fall on the rankings. And so they have this very difficult choice, like a Scylla and Charybdis, between a rock and a hard place, where they have to either lower standards or reduce class sizes or both. And so that means that, in part, reducing standards means easier for you to get in as an applicant. They don't want to do that, and so it means maybe getting more international students or opening their doors to students regardless of geography, and online education is a potential solution for some of that. Not for all schools, of course. Some schools will close, some schools will merge, but I think online is going to grow. The pressure is going to be there. And if you follow the ABA space, you follow news from the American Bar Association, you're going to see more online programs, which is good news for you as an applicant. It's going to become a buyer's market where you are in a more powerful negotiating position and you will be able to better negotiate elimination of fees and lower tuition as well. The com before me is asking, I was going to take the LSAT this June. I graduate undergrad in December. Is June too early to take the LSAT? No, it's not. I mean, your LSAT score is good for 5 years, right? So the way I look at it is you're planning ahead. You can take the LSAT in June. You can graduate undergrad in December. You can apply to law school in September and start law school 1 year later. So I said that a little bit out of order. I'll reframe it. You spend the next 4 months and change studying for the LSAT. You take it in June. You can retake it in August as a backup. You can apply the second the application's open in September, and you'll start law school 1 year later. The fact that you graduate in December versus graduating in May doesn't really matter because you don't need to have completed undergrad to apply. So your path forward seems totally fine, and I like it because you then have August as a backup just in case you need it. You may not need it. 4 months is enough time to get a top score, but if you need more time, it'll be there for you. I see Kylie is asking, was the January LSAT tougher than others? I did so much better in November. I mean, the LSAT's equated, right? So no LSAT test form is meant to be easier or harder than another. The LSATs have to be comparable, right? Because an LSAT score earned in January needs to be apples to apples with an LSAT score earned in February or earned in November. Now, of course, some LSATs will hit students harder than others just based on the idiosyncrasies or particulars of that exam, but on a whole, in aggregate, it's meant to wash out. But scores fluctuate, scores drop sometimes. Lots of potential reasons could be how you slept the night before, whether you were sick that day, a bad proctor, a tech issue, nerves and anxiety. For the January LSAT in particular, of course, we had the unique complicating factor of LSAC's unannounced removal of the dual or comparative passage, which threw some folks for a loop. For some people, that played a role, but might not have been in the test, might have just been random. And if you did better in November and your score dropped, that's unfortunate. But luckily, because law schools only consider the highest score on your record, the November LSAT score is what will ultimately count. And if you want to retake it in April or June, you can. Your LSAT score is good for 5 years, and it might mean delaying a cycle, but if you need to get your score up to a certain level, it might be worth the delay. And if you want my help preparing for that LSAT retake, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring to everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. As to the question of whether to cancel a lower score, doesn't really matter. If you would like to cancel it, you can do so on your lsac.org account. You have, I think it's 6 calendar days to cancel before it is on your permanent record. Not a big deal though, because again, only the highest score counts for admissions. I see Colin before me saying I'm signed up for the program. Awesome, congrats. I'm excited to have you in the program. That's great. Excited to help you get your score up. And feel free to keep the questions coming, folks. I see a ton coming in. I see Joe's asking, if I'm just entering my bachelor's, when should I start studying for the LSAT? So I think it's premature to start studying for the LSAT as a freshman, just because you may change your career goals so many times in the first couple of years, especially just like you change your major a couple of times. And so if anything, I'd say explore undergrad, enjoy freshman year, decide whether law is really what you want to pursue. The LSAT's not going anywhere. Law school's not going anywhere. Maintain a high GPA, because law school admissions is primarily LSAT, but GPA also plays a role. And so get that GPA as high as possible, discover what you really want to do, and then you can start studying for the LSAT as a sophomore and take it as a junior, and that's totally fine. You'll still be early enough, giving yourself sufficient time to study for the LSAT. Got someone asking, I got a 148 LSAT and a 393 GPA. What are my chances? I mean, for any law school, whether it's US or Canada, this person's a Canadian. I mean, a 148 is still below average in aggregate for anyone taking the LSAT, let alone getting into a law school. And so your GPA is great, but your LSAT score has some room for improvement. If you could get it to even 160 for admissions, that would do a lot to help you out. I think numbers for LSAT are not as high in Canada as in the US, so a 160 or 165 might be enough. Maybe not for a U of T, for example, but for a lower ranked school might be sufficient. But like I always say, look at the medians for the school that you're considering, see what's going to make you competitive. Your GPA is great, but if you can retake and get 10, 15 points higher, you'll be in a much better position. Question about what do you do if you're below the numbers? So if you're below both on the LSAT and the GPA metric, my first advice is just retake the LSAT, get a higher score. Your GPA is pretty fixed at this point in time, and it's prohibitively difficult to redo all of undergrad, but your LSAT score is 1 day, 2.5 hours, and weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined. So my thought is just retake. And retake prep could be as little as taking 1 practice test a week, reviewing it in depth, drilling some weak areas. That could be enough to not only maintain your LSAT abilities, but also improve them, because as you review, as you go through your mistakes, you'll better understand the patterns of the test. And that's going to help you get your score up. And 10 weeks, 2.5 months, that would give you at least 10 exams under timed conditions if you're taking it in April as a retake, for example. If you do 2 exams a week, that's 20 exams under your belt, another 2,000 questions that you're completing. It would be remarkable to me if you did not better understand the patterns of the test, if you didn't better learn from your mistakes, having done 2,000 questions and reviewing your mistakes in depth. I'm sorry, but that's to me, that's like a no-brainer compared to redoing all of undergrad. And additionally, studying more, learning your weak area is better. I think that retaking the LSAT's the best way to improve your odds. Aside from that, of course, you've got your application essays, your personal statement, your adversity/diversity statement, your resume, any optional essays or addenda, your letters of rec, like all of that can play a role as well. But the numbers, first and foremost, are the biggest and best way to improve your odds of admission. And so I would start with the LSAT, then work on the other stuff. And by the way, though, if you're applying this cycle and you haven't gotten your letters of rec in, like definitely bother your recommenders, get those letters in, because you don't want to be waiting on somebody else when everything else is complete and ready, right? So especially for those of you who got your January LSAT score back today and you want to hit submit and you're still polishing your essays, check your LSAC account, make sure your recommender letters are in. If not, bug them. And for those of you who are going for February, same deal. Make sure that you are getting your letters of rec in from the recommenders, because it's the last remaining piece of the puzzle in many cases. The comment before me is asking, if I switched schools, meaning you transferred undergrad, which GPA will the law schools look at? So they're looking at your undergraduate GPA, specifically your BA, your first BA that you complete. And so let's say you transferred from one school to another as part of earning the first BA, or you went from community college to a 4-year institution. All of that's going to count. All of that will be combined into your LSAC calculated GPA. So they're going to look at it collectively from your BA. 876 is asking, is becoming a lawyer worth it? So I actually just did a video on this yesterday, and the answer is it depends. And if you want to see that video, by the way, it's on the live tab of the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, which you can access through the link in my bio. And by the way, folks, I should have mentioned this. I do lives like this every single weekday. Same place, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this. I normally do these at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. I'm doing today's a little bit earlier because of the LSAT score release. I wanted to be here live to support those getting their January scores back, preparing for retakes potentially. And so if you find this helpful, of course, please spread the word. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost lives because they can't run ads during them. And so you're sharing this to your socials. I'm sharing the link to the live in your Discord or subreddit or Facebook groups or group chats. It really does help a lot. To the question of whether law school is worth it, though, it depends on what you pay for law school, if anything, and what your career goals are. And so is it worthwhile to go to a low-ranked law school and pay sticker price? Probably not. Could it be worth paying sticker for Yale or Harvard? Maybe, because the earning potential with a Harvard or Yale law school degree is pretty good, especially if you go into big law, right? So it would be easy to pay off that debt associated if you have debt associated with that. But in contrast, to go to Cooley Law, for example, paying sticker is a terrible idea in most cases. So it depends. Again, additionally, of course, what do you want to do with your law degree? Do you have a good idea of what you want to do with your degree? If you're going on a whim or for lack of a better option, maybe not a good idea, though. If you have a really clear sense of why you want to practice law, then maybe it is worth it. What are your alternatives? All of that can play a role. So there's no right answer. Is it worth it or is it not worth it? It all depends on your financial situation and your goals. And Tiffany's asking, what's bad about Cooley Law? I mean, they have some of the worst employment outcomes and bar passage rates, and they are predatory, in my opinion. They accept a lot of students who have really bad numbers, who are demonstrably unlikely to pass the bar exam. and get employment upon graduating. They don't get good employment outcomes for their students. And so you can look, by the way, at for any given ABA approved law school, you can see what percentage of their graduates are employed with a JD required position 9 months after graduation. You can also see what percentage of their graduates pass the bar on their first attempt. And so that will give you a sense of the quality of the education and the quality of the student body. And ideally, you want to go to a school that has really good employment outcomes for their students and prepares them adequately for the bar. And if you're going to a lower ranked school that has bad outcomes, which you shouldn't do, but let's say you did it anyway, you don't want to pay for it because you're taking on a risk. And when a school has sufficiently bad outcomes and percentages, they will actually get put on notice by the ABA, and that will be disclosed on their website as well as a big warning flag, a big warning sign. And as for the exact percentages, I mean, it's going to vary. I would say look at better ranked law schools and see what their numbers are, and then compare. There's no necessarily dividing line for this sort of thing, but if you look at the kind of outcomes that top 50 law schools or top 30 law schools have, that's relatively good, and then look at the lower ranked schools, and that's relatively bad. I'm seeing that user 5267 is asking, does LSAT argumentative writing matter? It matters more than it used to, but it's still not nearly as important as the scored portions of the LSAT. The reason it matters more than it used to is because with AI written application essays, the argumentative writing is really the only chance that law schools have to see a truly unadulterated sample of your writing where they're confident that no one or nothing helped you with your writing. If you are a non-native English speaker, it matters more. If your English grades in undergrad were not good, it also matters more. And LSAC has indicated they are likely to start scoring it either later this year or next year. They've added a field to the LSAT score report called the writing ability score. And right now that field is empty, but it's going to get it filled in sometime soon. They're not adding random fields to score reports for no reason. And when it is scored, of course, it will matter more than it does now, but still not as much as the multiple choice portions of the LSAT. So don't treat it like a joke. Take it seriously, but don't spend a lot of time studying for it if you don't yet have the numbers out of 180 taken care of, if you don't have the multiple choice portion taken care of. And once they start scoring it, of course, I'll have plenty more to say about it, and I'll talk about how to get a higher score on it and the rubrics and such. But for now, there's no data about what the scoring is going to look like, and LSAC will. This is big enough that they're going to provide plenty of advance notice about what several months before they start scoring it, and they will also give more guidance on what goes into good writing or bad writing. If we look at when the SAT writing got scored many years ago, what they found is that longer essays got higher scores, essays with more paragraph breaks got higher scores, and essays with more advanced vocabulary also got better scores, which is kind of good and bad. I mean, being able to use good vocabulary, of course, is well correlated with better writing ability, but anybody can throw in a big 5-syllable word and not know what it means and use it incorrectly. And anybody can write a lot of words, but not necessarily have them be good words. But all else being equal, I'd say better to write longer essays, have more to say. And if you are able to use better vocabulary, then of course, use the better vocabulary. You want your essays structured well with intro paragraph, 2 or 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph as well. It's important to structure your writing clearly, make it easy to follow. Use topic sentences, have a thesis statement. Don't make them guess at what you're trying to get at. With argumentative writing, basically, they give you source material like evidence, like your old style DBQ document-based question from I think it was the AP exams, if anyone remembers those. So you use the source material, you have 15 minutes to pull that all together and make an outline or a rough draft or take some notes. Then you have 35 minutes to write the actual essay itself. And so you want to use the evidence, You want to pick a side, argue in favor of it, acknowledge the weaknesses or downside of the other side, and point out why you think they're wrong. So be balanced, but be clear in what you're choosing and why. Have the evidence to back it up. Acknowledge the weaknesses of the side that you're choosing, but ultimately still come down in favor of that side. I see the comment before me saying I call it the 3 to 5 essay. Yeah, I mean, I guess 3 to 5, I mean, I would think about it as like you have 3 to 5 paragraphs, right? So intro, body, conclusion at minimum, but better to have 2 or 3 body paragraphs. An intro conclusion can basically be the same thing, but paraphrased, reworded, where you're reiterating what you're choosing and why. Then in the first 2 bodies, you give 2 different pieces of evidence for what you're choosing. In the third body, you acknowledge the counter premises or the evidence going against your choice, but still based on how you weigh the evidence, you are still saying the evidence in favor of my side is stronger than the evidence against my side, because you arbitrarily perhaps choose to weigh one side more heavily than the other. And again, like I wouldn't over-index on the writing just because it is unscored. Not nearly as important for law school admissions because law schools are not evaluated based on your writing. They're evaluated based on your LSAT score and your GPA, because that's what goes to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls their data from for inclusion in the US News rankings. And so if your LSAT score is not at or above your goal, if you're not at or above the medians of the schools that you're targeting, I wouldn't even be thinking about the writing sample right now. Focus on the scored portions of the LSAT. Get your LSAT score up above medians, ideally above the 75th percentile of the schools that you're targeting, and then you could think about the application essays and the writing sample as well. And by the way, you do have to complete the writing sample before you get your LSAT score back. If any of you have not gotten your LSAT score back today, that might be why. There might be a hold on your LSAT score because you didn't complete the argumentative writing. So make sure you completed it. If not, do so ASAP. There will be a little bit of a backlog on LSAC's part because they have so many people who didn't do it yet. And so they're going to check anything shady in your background, like if you had other people in the background or if you had a backpack in your background for test security reasons, they will not approve your writing, and you may need to redo it, or at least it'll trigger a human review versus the AI security review. And so for anyone taking the LSAT in February, April, or June or beyond, you should be aware that your writing sample must be completed and approved before your score comes out. And you can complete it starting 8 days prior to the official LSAT, or you could do it after the LSAT. I typically recommend, before you take the LSAT, for those taking it in February or beyond, focus on your LSAT prep, the multiple choice portions, of course, logical reasoning and reading comp. Take the official LSAT, then take a day or 2 off because you deserve it. You've worked hard, you took the official LSAT. Then, after only a day or 2, take the writing sample so that there's not going to be any delays in getting your score back. And that's especially important for those of you who are taking the February test, because if you're applying, assuming that you're applying this cycle, you want to be able to hit submit on your applications as soon as possible after the score comes out. So let's say February LSAT scores come out February 25th. You want to be able to hit submit on your applications February 25th. You don't want any additional undue delays for that reason. And so to the question on do we help with admissions and getting into schools, I mean, at LSAT Unplugged, we focus primarily on the LSAT because it is the biggest factor in the law school admissions process. We do have services helping with application essays. We have editors on staff, but we typically recommend that you focus first and foremost on your LSAT prep because it's the biggest, most impactful factor in the admissions process. Once you've locked in your score, then we could switch gears and help you with your creating a rough draft, helping you decide what to cover, helping you polish that essay. We're not going to write your essays for you, of course, but we help you take your rough draft or even your stream of consciousness and we help you craft it into compelling narrative. So we'll ask you a series of guiding questions, and then we will reorganize and reshape your words and better structure them into a strong skeleton or rough draft. We'll ask you some follow-ups, go back and forth a bit till they're polished and perfect. We actually have a service where we help you with unlimited revisions of your essays because good writing takes time. It goes through round after round after round of editing. But again, LSAT first and foremost. If you're planning far ahead, if you're taking the LSAT in April or June or August and applying to start law school in the fall, we'll have the whole summer to work on your applications. If you are taking the LSAT in February and applying towards the tail end of this cycle, then I would alternatively recommend that you focus on the LSAT for now. Then once you take the LSAT, you've got a couple of weeks between taking it and getting your score back. And during those few weeks, that's when you shift gears and focus on your application essays. And that's where we go through the rounds of revision in a shorter, more concentrated period of time. And of course, more time is better, but we work with what we've got, right? Selim's asking, is Law Hub good? Yeah, Law Hub is great. I mean, LSAC's Law Hub platform is where you're going to access your official LSAT practice tests. It's, in my view, the best way to take practice tests because the LSAT is online. So don't take practice tests out of books. And Law Hub is the only platform that actually replicates the official test day experience. No unofficial third-party platforms are even permitted to replicate the look and feel that you'll have on test day with Prometric. So I recommend taking all your practice tests in Law Hub specifically. Then a follow-up, what if I plan on taking the LSAT in September in hopes of going to law school in 2027? That's totally fine. I think that's a good move. If you take the LSAT in September, scores come back end of the month, and I would apply right then and apply early in the cycle. Applications open in September as well, so you could take it in August instead, and then apply the second applications open September 1st. But if you wanted to take it in September for whatever reason, that's also totally fine. DDJ is asking, I've taken the LSAT 5 times with really low scores. Is it worth taking it a 6th time? Could be. I mean, I guess my question is, how did you study for it those first 5 times? Did you study adequately? Did you take a course? Did you get coaching, or were you self-studying? Were you just using some old hand-me-down textbook? How much time did you put in? On a 6th retake, a 6th time, what could you do differently next time around? Is there a type of studying, a way of studying, a type of support that you did not take advantage of that you could take advantage of next time around to get that score up? We don't want to just do the same thing over and over and expect different results, of course. That's insanity. We want to think about what untapped potential, what stones unturned have you not yet explored that you could explore that would make a difference. If you want to talk through what you could do differently next time, if you're not sure, and if you want to troubleshoot it, you could book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, open offer to everybody out there, by the way. The link to book that free lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. Open offer for everyone watching this. Happy to help you troubleshoot, help you craft your plan of attack, whether you're taking it in April, June, August, or beyond. If your score dropped and you're not sure why, you want to retake and do better, happy to help you figure out what you could do differently. And yeah, if you take it in August and don't like your score, retaking in September is a totally fine move. And the nice thing about retaking is that the LSAT's offered 8 times a year. So almost every month, there's always another LSAT coming up in a month or two. And so you've just got to stay fresh on the LSAT for another month or two and retake it and get a higher score on a retake. And if you don't, no big deal, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on your record. And so, well worth retaking. Through luck alone, you do better. That's great. If not, no big deal. But through more studying, through targeting your weak areas, through taking more practice tests and reviewing them, getting some more support maybe, you should be able to get it up, I would expect. Sonya's asking, is it worth taking the LSAT in April for negotiations or applying late? Great question. So definitely worth retaking it for negotiation purposes. If you get a couple points more, that could unlock thousands of dollars in scholarship money. It's the easiest money you're ever going to make. In terms of initially applying in April with an April score, it is a bit late in the cycle. It's a bit harder to get in, less scholarship money available. But you've also got to balance that against the opportunity cost of delaying your law school plans by an entire year. it's another year of being in the status quo situation versus another year of presumably having more earning potential as an attorney on the other end. But if you've already applied and didn't like the scholarship offers that you got, then yeah, I think retaking is a good move. Then you update that with a new score, and you're in a more powerful negotiating position at that point. Jared's asking, what's your favorite section on the test? It's a simpler question than it used to be, right? Because we used to have logic games. We no longer do, so it's just logical reasoning and reading count. And I think that I would have answered logic games back when they were on the test because they were like puzzles, a little bit like Sudoku. I think that they were a little bit more gamified than the other sections. But I think now I'd probably say logical reasoning just because you get more variety. It's a grab bag where they're just throwing different things at you constantly. You got 26 or so different questions of all different types coming at you. You got strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, parallel reasoning, a parallel flaw. Then you got reading comp also, but I think the 15 or so different types of logical reasoning questions are giving you more variety. And I think variety is the spice of life, right? It keeps things fun, keeps it interesting. They're constantly mixing it up. And the arguments are just so ridiculous, right? So that you got to have fun with some of them. Some of them are just frankly absurd, that arguments that you would never see in everyday life. And so I think that makes it more fun. But you could also say that the entire LSAT is a test of reading comprehension as well, right? Because it's all about evaluating arguments, being critical, being skeptical. The difference is that in reading comp, the arguments are a little bit less ridiculous and there are a couple of different viewpoints being presented. But also in reading comp, the topics are on a surface level at least more boring, so you got to find ways to get interested in them, whereas I think in logical reasoning, they're more unique, more fun. And there's one about prison inmates getting plastic surgery. Like, I don't know where they come up with this sort of thing. I think it's just kind of funny sometimes. And Jared's just saying, yeah, parallel flaw was so time consuming for me on the test. Yeah, it is time consuming, but the flaws are ridiculous sometimes, so I get a kick out of those. But if you're not having fun with the LSAT, you're missing out, because the LSAT can be fun, it can be enjoyable, and it can be easy as well. But you gotta fake it till you make it, and you gotta find ways to get interested in the topic. And if it's not fun for you, reach out to me, because I can help you get more into it, help you find more fun with the LSAT. If you want to talk through your LSAT prep, if you want to talk through your situation, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally. I'll meet with you privately one-on-one via Zoom video, help you talk through your plan of attack, help you craft a study plan to get you to your goal score in your time frame. The link to book that free call with me is unpluggedprep.com/start, below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok, Instagram as well. Open offer for everybody watching this now or later. And by the way, folks, if you enjoyed this live, I do this every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, wherever you're watching this. I'll see you all there. Please spread the word. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best. Thanks for joining. Take care. It was a pleasure.